Hello everyone. This is the 44th part of the story, Magical Journey in Harry Potter World. Chapter 119, Start of the Summer. Quinn sat down on the chair in a semi-ornate and elegant office. To his front was the office's owner, who sat behind a desk. "I assume we're going to talk about the Greengrass and Potter matters?" asked Quinn. "Yes, we are," replied the older gentleman. "I understand the Potters, but you didn't tell me anything about the Greengrass family. What relation do you have with them?" It was the day after Quinn had returned from Hogwarts. He was sitting in his grandfather's office talking about his associations with children of affluent and well-connected families. "The Potters want to invite me to show hospitality and their gratitude for having helped them out. When their invitations arrive, I'll reply at my own discretion," answered Quinn before moving on to the next family. "The Greengrass matter is a bit more complicated and yet so simple," sighed Quinn. "The Greengrass bloodline suffers from a blood curse, a generational curse that is passed along to the descendants. It causes them to have a limited lifespan and an even weaker constitution. The curse skips generations and doesn't affect everyone, but this generation was out of luck." "This curse resurfaced? Who is it?" "Astoria Greengrass, the younger of the Greengrass children. She bears the curse and with it, all its malignant effects," answered Quinn, thinking about the weak Astoria that he saw in the hospital wing bed. "And you have a way to cure the blood curse?" Quinn shook his head in rejection. "No, I'm not able to cure it. If I had the cure, we wouldn't have this talk. I would have cured her, and that would have been the end. It seems you've made friends. Friends you don't mind helping out with nothing in return." "Yes, I have. I have made a few close friends," nodded Quinn. "I gave Astoria my word that I would help her mitigate the symptoms of the blood curse whenever she needed. And I assured her older sister that I will continue to palliate Astoria's symptoms until a cure is found or discovered. And that can be in many, many years from now. How have you been able to help the younger daughter? I'm sure the Greengrass family must have been looking for the cure for centuries." Quinn sighed and then raised his hands. He willed his magic and his forearm glowed in a fiery red light, highlighting his veins. "Blood magic," sighed Quinn. He didn't want to show magics that were questionable from a moral point of view. "I used blood magic to repress the curse. It worked wonders because the blood curse has been created with the same branch of magic." He didn't go into the details of the magic as it wasn't necessary. "Blood magic? Yes, I remember there being a few books in your collections. I just hoped it would be a while till you started to dabble in dangerous magic," sighed George West. "The books weren't from around here, that's for sure. Are you sure it's safe for you? Any dangers in general?" "There aren't. It's just like any healing spell. I won't be in danger of any harm from the blood curse and neither will Astoria," answered Quinn. "So what do you want me to do?" "She's your friend. Of course you can continue to heal her," said George. "Astoria is my friend, but Jacob Greengrass isn't." "He is the Greengrass householder," said Quinn. "I was thinking you could use this opportunity to build some positive and profitable ties with the Greengrass family. I will leave the matters to you. I will continue to heal Astoria regardless of whether you get a partnership or not. You think Jacob Greengrass will likely show some goodwill towards us because you're healing his daughter?" "Yes, his daughter will continue to receive my treatment. If you could take advantage of the situation, strike a deal and start a business venture together, it will be a win-win for everyone. I'm sure Jacob Greengrass will be thrilled to do business with us and, thus, he will be quite proactive," suggested Quinn, seeing this situation as a viable business opportunity. George nodded. He agreed that this would indeed be a good business opportunity. "All right, after Jacob Greengrass sends over a letter, I shall set up a meeting. We'll see if he wants to cooperate." Quinn nodded. He didn't want to be part of such matters. "Now, about the Potters?" asked George. "What about them? Do you want us to go with you?" If you want. You're welcome to join me," said Quinn. He shrugged. He didn't care whether his grandfather came along with him or not. "I see, then I won't be coming along," declared George. "I've nothing to talk about with the Potter family. You could ask Leah. Perhaps she'll want to come with you." "All right, I'll ask Leah," nodded Quinn. Anything else you want to talk about?" trying to end the conversation. He needed to leave for a meeting in a while. "Oh, yes. I want to learn apparition, so I'll need you to book me an apparition course," said Quinn, and when he saw George didn't look averse to the idea, he continued. "In Denmark." George was about to agree but then stopped at Quinn's words. "In Denmark? Why?" "They have legalized under 17 apparition there, so I thought, if I am going to learn apparition, why not learn it where it's legal at my age," shrugged Quinn, explaining his reasoning to his grandfather. "Also, I thought it would be fun to get out of the country for a week." "A week?" smiled George. "Are you implying that it will take you only a week to learn how to apparate? That's too little time to learn apparition, don't you think?" A smile of confidence surfaced on Quinn's face as he replied, "Of course not, I'm sure it will take longer to become a master, but I'm sure I'll get the basics down in under a week. Enough to get around, I presume." George tapped his finger on his desk. He gazed at Quinn for a few seconds before nodding. "All right, I will arrange your travel and stay. One of our associates will chaperone you while you stay in Denmark." "I don't require a chaperone," rebuked Quinn. "Of course, I understand, yet I insist that there be one," inquired George. "Of course, whomever I choose won't restrict your movements. They will only make sure that you're safe." Quinn sighed. He knew that no matter what he said, it wouldn't work. George West had decided it, and Quinn wasn't feeling rebellious enough to defy his grandfather. "Please choose someone fun. At least someone who is flexible. You know, not reluctant to do some exploration," asked Quinn. George smiled in reply. "I shall see what I can do." Scene break. "You've become sloppy. Your fingers are rigid, the flow is terrible, and the sound, oh my ears, the sound. It's like the chords have been substituted by arpeggios." Quinn winced as he played the piano. Listening to cutting taunts and criticism to his playing wasn't his cup of tea. "Now I know why I never got the urge to play after I returned home," thought Quinn as he continued to play Diabelli's Sonatina Op. 151. He glanced over his shoulder to see his strict piano teacher looking at him disapprovingly. "I didn't have much time to regularly practice, Ms. Rosie," said Quinn. He was conscious that he had played the piano a little more than a handful of times. "I didn't expect you to make excuses, young master," humphed Ms. Rosie as her eyes narrowed. "If one wants to make time, they'll find the time. It's called time management. If you want to make excuses, at least choose a believable one." Quinn suppressed a groan but didn't stop playing, as stopping while playing a piece in the middle wasn't an option. He closed his eyes, and the efficiency aspect of his occlumency came into play. His mind became sharper, and so did his control over his body. The fingers became mechanical as the sound of the piano began to flow. It lacked individuality and emotions, but it was correct, precise, and how the piece was supposed to be played. Ms. Rosie looked at the piano, then at Quinn's hands, and finally at Quinn. She didn't say anything until Quinn was done finishing the piece. The piece was finally done, and Quinn's fingers finally came to a stop. He looked up at Ms. Rosie and asked, "How was the last act?" "It flowed, didn't it?" "It was more than decent," nodded Ms. Rosie. "But you used magic as an aid. It wasn't your natural skill. But I will allow it. It will, at least, shake off the rust." "I can't get a break," sighed Quinn. "I will get better than this by the end of the break," assured Quinn. "No magic?" "No magic," nodded Quinn. "Pure skill." Quinn turned back to the piano and once again began playing. This time the piece was more mainstream, Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 12 in F major. He didn't use occlumency to improve his skill. The accuracy while playing was lower, but the individuality and emotion remained. "Better," complimented Ms. Rosie as she could tell the difference. As he continued to play, Quinn heard Ms. Rosie speak up again. "I heard you'll soon be going to the Potters for dinner?" "Yes," replied with a furrow of his brow in confusion. "I see. Then we shall revise your table manners and other skills." "I want to see how bad you've gotten," sniffed Ms. Rosie. "I wonder how bad your manners have become after eating with children." Tang. Ms. Rosie, whined Quinn and stopped playing with a discordant note. "My manners are fine. I consciously made sure they stayed the same, as you taught me to. Quinn was expecting a hot retort in return, but he got a hand brushing through his hair. How else am I supposed to spend time with you? Asked the woman who had been the motherly figure for Quinn. If I don't try to nag you, would you spend time with me? Quinn looked at the oldest person in the West Manor. She was even older than his grandfather. Now, why would you say that? Asked Quinn as he stood up from his seat. You just have to say it, and I'll spend all the time you want with you. Out of all adults in his life, Quinn considered Ms. Rosie to be the one who influenced him the most. More than his grandfather, more this sister, more than Elliot and, finally, more than Alan. Quinn's personality was an amalgam of qualities that he liked in the adults surrounding him. These qualities, along with his own base personality, had combined together to form the personality of Quinn West. But the thing that first attracted people to Quinn was the way he held himself. The way he walked, sat, and moved his body was all thanks to Ms. Rosie. People communicated in two ways. There was verbal and nonverbal communication. But what people often took for granted was body language, and the truth was that 70 to 93% of all communication was nonverbal. Quinn's current personality was based upon his old personality. His old self from his previous life was still the base for his new one. But Quinn's body language had nothing of his old one. Everything from his previous home had been erased, stripped away. He was the way he was now thanks to Ms. Rosie. Quinn's body language accompanied his words with the backbone and backing that they needed. The slight gestures he made while talking, such as the tilt of his head, the movement of his hands, the way he sat, the balance of his weight while he stood, were what made his words gain that plus that made people listen to him. Quinn liked magic, but what about the hard work that he put in? He was nowhere this hard-working in his previous life. It was Ms. Rosie's constant pestering that forced him to work on things. He wasn't good at any of the things Ms. Rosie taught him, but her tutelage was what showed Quinn how good it felt when hard work paid off. Quinn was sure that if he hadn't had Ms. Rosie in his life, Quinn wouldn't have been able to maintain the level of hard work he put in now. I promise that I will spend time with you, said Quinn as he gave Ms. Rosie a side hug. You know I can't live with you. If you weren't here, I'd be lazy, like Leah. Ms. Rosie lightly slapped Quinn's shoulder. She gave him a little smile. Your sister isn't lazy. I sometimes worry about that girl. Your grandfather makes Leah work a little too hard. Georgie needs to reel it in a little. While Ms. Rosie had raised Quinn ever since he was a 1-year-old baby, Ms. Rosie had also raised Leah ever since she was 11 years old. And similar to Quinn, she had been the only motherly figure to Leah, and that was even more important to Leah, as she was a girl. Quinn smiled after he heard Ms. Rosie calling his grandfather Georgie. That nickname would escape her mouth sometimes whenever she felt safe enough. She is fine after all, I guess, chuckled Quinn. I'm sure she has fun after work. Besides, I think she is a secret workaholic. Ms. Rosie shook her head before separating from Quinn. She, then, returned to her usual strict mode. Now, let's get to the piano, instructed Ms. Rosie. I need to see you better than now by the end of summer. Quinn smiled. As much as he enjoyed playing the piano on his own, as it calmed him down, playing with Ms. Rosie standing near his back let him feel nostalgia. It had another kind of charm. Scene break. Elliot watched as Quinn stood in their old wood shack near a herb garden that he and Quinn had built together when Quinn had been younger. No one other than Quinn used the shack, and it would be in the summer breaks when Quinn would use it. Aside from that time, the shack would remain closed. Nevertheless, Elliot made sure the shack was kept functional throughout the year. Last year, Quinn hadn't used it once because of his inability to use magic. He even refused to even touch the shack even after Elliot had offered to handle the magic portion of the potion brewing. So it was a pleasant sight to Elliot to see Quinn working on potion brewing in the old shack where he taught Quinn the art of brewing. What are you brewing? Quinn looked up to see Elliot standing near the shack's door. Uncle Elliot, I didn't see you there, smiled Quinn as he moved to another table and retrieved a light yellow powder. I'm performing some alchemy. Elliot's eyes widened when he heard Quinn. Alchemy? Young master, I didn't know you knew how to perform alchemy. Alchemy was an advanced branch of magic, and he didn't think that someone as young as Quinn would know how to perform alchemy. I know a thing or two, smiled Quinn as he carefully sprinkled the yellow powder into the bubbling cauldron. What are you doing? Asked Elliot in fascination and curiosity. He had only met a few alchemists in his life, but he hadn't seen any of them work. So this was an exciting moment for him. I'm brewing a fertilizer of sorts, replied Quinn. I've been working on alchemic solutions that encourage and enhance plant growth. Quinn pointed at the cauldron in front of him and continued, this one here is a solution that would enable the growth of a magical herb that only grows near the radiating heat of volcanoes. If I add this solution to a soil patch in our garden, that magical plant will grow here even if the environment isn't suitable for it. A smile surfaced on Quinn's face as he observed the change inside the cauldron. It's almost ready, smiled Quinn. Elliot saw Quinn raise his hand. Suddenly, orange magic beams appeared and entered the cauldron. That made Elliot gasp because in potion brewing, inserting external magic into a boiling brew was inviting an explosion to the face. But this was alchemy, and it was all about external magic to push the magic essence of ingredients to create something extraordinary. After Quinn was done, he stepped back as the brew inside the cauldron started to flash in earthy colors. The flashing lights grew stronger and brighter before everything died down, and what remained was a sizzling sound from inside the cauldron. Quinn stepped closer, peeked inside the cauldron before turning to Elliot in satisfaction. It's a success. He collected the resulting solution, which had reduced from a full cauldron to a jug. Let's see this in action, grinned Quinn. He raised the jug full of the alchemic fertilizer and showed it to Elliot. Elliot and Quinn walked to the herb garden, where Quinn had prepared a wide and shallow reinforced claw pot filled with soil from the garden. I don't want the other plants to be affected, so I'll be using it in here, explained Quinn to Elliot, who listened thoroughly. The seeds are already in there, so let's pour it in and see the result. Quinn poured the jug of alchemic solution into the soil, and the effects were instant. The brown soil turned black as the solution seeped and spread throughout the pot. But it wasn't over, as the black soil also gained a red sheen that would very dully flash when the sun reflected on it. Elliot could feel that the color change wasn't the only thing it changed. He could feel an intense heat coming from the pot. If he weren't looking, he would have thought that he was standing near a blazing fire. Now we will have to wait for a few days to see the results, guessed Elliot. I'm looking forward to seeing how the plant will grow inside this soil. Oh, no, Uncle Elliot, chuckled Quinn. While it would indeed take weeks for the plant to grow to full maturity. This is alchemy, a wondrous art. Quinn pointed at the soil, and Elliot saw brown twigs emerge out of the hot black soil. The solution I brewed had a little boost in it. The sprouting of the seeds is the hardest part for this plant due to the conditions it grows in. But with alchemy, we'll be able to kickstart that sprouting, and now every seed will be able to grow to maturity. Elliot continued to watch as Quinn continued. This could also have been accomplished with potions, but it would have taken weeks or even months for me to brew a potion with similar effects, smiled Quinn. Luckily, this is alchemy. I've been able to recreate months of potion brewing within a day. Uncle. I know you once said potions are the ultimate transformative magic, but I think alchemy takes that crown. Elliot wordlessly nodded as he continued to see seeds sprout from inside the black soil. Chapter 120, Greengrasses Visit the West Manor. George West and Elliot Dalton stood near the fireplace of West Manor, which was in an ornate room that was used to greet guests who arrived at the villa via flu travel. Are the flu wards adjusted? Asked George, making sure for the last time. A flu fireplace could be warded to block its connection to the flu network, and the West Manor flu fireplace had those wards always active until needed. So until the wards were adjusted, no one could enter the West Manor via the fireplace. Elliot nodded in reply. Yes, the wards were adjusted half an hour ago. Where's my grandson? Asked George, looking at Elliot, who was standing beside him. Ms. Rosie, on the other hand, was behind them, near the door. I am afraid I am not sure. Elliot shook his head. He looked back at Ms. Rosie to see whether she knew Quinn's whereabouts. He is in the rehearsal room, replied Ms. Rosie. George glanced back at Ms. Rosie and asked, why isn't he here? Is he not aware of the time of arrival? I don't think he is aware, replied Elliot after thinking if Quinn had been made aware of today's events. It seems we forgot to tell him. They are coming because of him, sighed George and then looked at Ms. Rosie to ask. Is he presentable? Ms. Rosie nodded her head in confidence, as though that wasn't even a question. Good, nodded back George, before turning towards the fireplace. At that moment, the fire turned green, which signified the arrival of someone at the West Manor flue point. 4 figures came out of the fireplace. They gracefully stepped onto the floor of the flue room of the West Manor. All of them were dressed in smart, semi-casual clothing. George stepped forward and greeted the new arrivals. Welcome to the West Manor, greeted George. Mr. West, it has been a while, greeted Jacob Greengrass as he stepped forward to shake hands with George. It has been, Jacob. It's good to see you after such a long time. George turned to the lady beside Jacob and softly smiled. Lady Sophie, you're still as beautiful as I saw you the last time. He took the offered hand and kissed it on the knuckles. Thank you for the compliment, Mr. West, smiled Sophie gracefully. You, too, are as charming as ever. George turned to the remaining 2 of the 4 and greeted them with a friendly and calm smile. Daphne and Astoria, right, greeted George to the 2 Greengrass sisters. It's lovely to meet you too. Quinn has told me a lot about you too. The 2 girls curtsied as practiced and greeted Quinn's grandfather. Nice to meet you, Mr. West. George looked at the Greengrass parents and said, how about we adults move to the lounge? He turned to glance at Daphne and Astoria. And leave them alone? Let's not bore you with our talks. He turned back to face the door and face the door where Ms. Rosie stood. Ms. Rosie, would you lead these 2 ladies to Quinn, instructed George, and then looked at the Greengrass sisters. If you 2 would follow Ms. Rosie, she will lead you to Quinn. Both daughters looked at their mother for permission, who nodded in agreement. Daphne and Astoria followed after Ms. Rosie. The 3 left the flue fireplace room. After the 3 left, George turned to Jacob and Sophie Greengrass. Let's talk. Scene break. How's Quinn when he is at home? Ms. Rosie looked to her left at the younger Greengrass sister, who looked at her with starry curiosity in her eyes as she asked the question. Could you elaborate, returned Ms. Rosie, as the 3 continued to walk to the rehearsal room. I mean, is he different at home than when he is outside, in front of others when he has company, asked Astoria. She wanted to know if Quinn was the same at home as he was at school. Ms. Rosie briefly glanced at the girl. She thought about the question and how she should answer it before speaking. From what I have observed, the young master is the same at home as when he is outside. If there was a difference, then it would be that the young master is much more relaxed at home. He is much more carefree and unrestricted while he is at home. Astoria felt confused because, from what she had seen, Quinn was always carefree and relaxed. And from what she had heard from Daphne and Tracy, Quinn was pretty much the most unrestricted person in Hogwarts. So he isn't sloppy or a slob at home, asked Astoria. She was secretly hoping that Quinn was the total opposite of what he was outside. Ms. Rosie raised her eyebrow. She had known Quinn since he was born and, from what she remembered, he had never been a slob or sloppy while he was at home. Astoria seemed to understand the answer from Ms. Rose's look. Has Quinn lived in this manner ever since he was a babe? This time it was Daphne who asked the question. And while Astoria asked the questions, Daphne looked around. They were walking through the corridors of a really large home. The mansion at the Greengrass estate was large, but it was way smaller than West Manor. Yes, the young master has lived in this villa ever since he was a babe, replied Ms. Rosie with a smile as she recalled the days before Quinn started school. How was Quinn when he was a child? Asked Astoria. Even Daphne seemed thoroughly interested in how Quinn was when he was a child. The young master was a lively child. When he wasn't staying still, he would be moving all over the manor, smiled Ms. Rosie. If we didn't keep an eye on him, he would be gone before we knew it. He covered a lot of ground back in those days. Daphne and Astoria imagined a baby Quinn with a childish grin on his face as he ran away on his chubby feet, while laughing with a baby chortle. We are here, informed Ms. Rosie. She stopped in front of a large double door. The young master is inside. She stepped forward and opened the door and a faint sound of a piano immediately leaked out. Ms. Rosie placed a finger on her lips before stepping inside. Daphne and Astoria looked at each other and then stepped inside the room. The sound of the piano became louder, more pronounced and clearer than when they were outside of the room. The rehearsal room was covered in sound charms that provided great acoustics. Originally, the grand piano inside the West Manor wasn't in this room. Quinn had moved it to this room to help him experiment with sound charms. Hence, he had gradually added charms to the room, so he built up and changed the charm scheme there was in the room. The result was the room achieved the best acoustics Quinn could accomplish with magic, which were much better than the acoustics there were in the original room. The three entered the rehearsal room, which opened into a corner of the room. Daphne and Astoria turned to their right and saw Quinn playing the piano. He had his back facing them. The music was fast and loud. The piece Quinn was playing didn't seem to have slow moments. Daphne and Astoria could see Quinn's head moving slightly as his fingers glided over the keys. Because of the pace, Quinn's fingers stuck close to the keys, while not getting a second of rest. Whereas Ms. Rosie listened to the music with her experienced ear and judged Quinn's playing, Daphne and Astoria became wholly entranced by the music that came out of the piano and was flowing around them. The music made them feel they needed to move around. It became impossible to stand still doing anything. Daphne softly tapped her foot and Astoria swayed her body. It took 2 minutes for Quinn to finish his piece. When the music ended, silence gained a hold on the room. "Young master, you have guests," said Ms. Rosie after Quinn had stopped playing the piano. Quinn turned back, and his eyes widened in surprise when he saw Daphne and Astoria standing beside Ms. Rosie. He looked at Ms. Rosie and asked, "They arrived today? Was I told about this? Did I forget?" He did a shallow and quick dive into his mindscape and sorted memories, but he couldn't recall hearing about the Greengrass family coming today. "It seems we forgot to inform you," replied Ms. Rosie. "They've just arrived. Jacob and Sophie Greengrass are with your grandfather." She politely gestured to Daphne and Astoria. "I was asked to escort these two ladies to you." Quinn stood up from his piano stool and walked towards the girls with a smile on his face. He wore a grey crew neck shirt and white shorts that went a little below his knees. On his feet were a pair of slippers that he wore for comfort while inside the house. "What has it been, 2 weeks?" smiled Quinn. "It's good to see you too." He pointed at the piano at his back and continued. "Did you like my playing?" "It was great. I felt I needed to move the entire time," nodded Astoria enthusiastically. Quinn looked at the other sister to see whether she had something to say. "I didn't know that you played the piano," asked Daphne. "I do," he gestured to Ms. Rosie by their side. "Ms. Rosie has been teaching me since I was young. I can also play the violin." Quinn then addressed Ms. Rosie, "Where's grandfather and his guests?" "In the lounge." "Then we will go to the living room," told Quinn. "Please prepare refreshments for us." "Yes, young master." Scene break. While the lounge was a sitting area with a more formal vibe, the living room was a sitting area with more of an informal feel. So while the adults did their thing, Quinn brought the Greengrass sisters to unwind in a relaxed setting. "How are you two?" asked Quinn, as he sat down on the sofa. Daphne and Astoria took a seat on the sofa in front of Quinn. "How's the summer break going?" "I rode a horse," exclaimed Astoria. "It was my first time, and even though it was frightening at first, it became so much fun later on." The Greengrass estate had a working horse stable. The horses there were bred and taken care of by the family. Every member of the Greengrass family learned how to ride a horse. But because of Astoria's health, she hadn't been allowed to learn. Now, however, as the blood curse had been repressed, Astoria could finally do things she had missed out on. And learning how to ride a horse was one of the things she had on her list. As such, the first thing Astoria asked after she had been cured was to be taught horseback riding. "Now isn't that great?" smiled Quinn. "I have only ridden horses a couple of times. I've ridden a winged horse, though, which is awesome." "Really? That sounds fun. I want to try it, too," exclaimed Astoria. She mentally added that to her to-do list. Daphne, on the other hand, softly sighed. She could almost see what Astoria was thinking of. It had been tough for her and their parents to get used to the new hyperactive Astoria, who wanted to do everything she hadn't been able to do previously. They still had the necessity to treat Astoria as someone who couldn't do strenuous physical activities. Even after Quinn had repressed the curse, they would get urges to stop Astoria from moving around so much. The three had to consciously remind themselves that Astoria's curse was no longer a problem. Quinn glanced towards Daphne and asked her the same question. "What about you, Daphne? What have you been doing?" "I've been busy keeping her company," sighed Daphne as she pointed at Astoria. "She drags me everywhere and makes me do all the things she's doing. Honestly, I don't know how someone can have so much energy. She's been moving all day without taking a break." Astoria stuck out a tongue and then hugged Daphne's arm. "Yet you still keep my company without complaining." Daphne shook her head with a sigh. Actually, she had been having fun. Astoria had been all smiles recently, and seeing her like that made Daphne joyous from the bottom of her heart. "What have you been doing?" asked Daphne as she shifted in her spot to get comfortable. Astoria kept snuggling into her side. Quinn shrugged in reply. "As of now, nothing new. I'm spending time with my family, relaxing, and doing things I can't do in Hogwarts. I've been going to many markets, too, both magical and non-magical." That surprised Daphne and Astoria, as they didn't have much contact with the non-magical world. But unlike many of their pureblood peers, the Greengrass sisters had a curiosity about the non-magical world. "How is a Muggle market?" asked Daphne, interested. "Is it different from something like Diagon Alley, for example?" "Markets are the same everywhere. Shops selling all sorts of items and assortments. The only difference is that the items are non-magicala," answered Quinn. "Well, some items out there might interest you because of their exotic origin. How about I take you out to the non-magical world someday? It will be a fun trip, I'm sure." Daphne looked at Quinn, who had just offered to take her to the Muggle world, and thought, "Is he talking about a date? Is he taking me out on a date?" The mind of the adolescent girl began to whirl. Lots of thoughts began to revolve around her. Daphne ended up thinking that Quinn's offer of escorting her to the non-magical world was him asking out for a date. "Daphne, Daphne, Daphne." Daphne snapped out of her thoughts and looked at Quinn, who was calling her. "Yes? Are you all right? You seem to zoom out there," asked Quinn. "Something you'd like to share with us?" "It's nothing. I was just thinking about the Muggle world," replied Daphne. She then sat up straight. She became attentive. "I will take you on that offer to show me the Muggle world." Quinn nodded with a lopsided smile. "It would be my honor to escort you, my lady." Daphne held back the blush that was threatening to break out on her cheeks. It took all her will to not show how she was feeling. In the end, she simply nodded. Scene break. It was after lunchtime, and everyone had gathered in the living room to witness Quinn repressing Astoria's curse. The trace placed on wands by the Ministry to track underage magic didn't work in magical households. The trace functioned by detecting magic when it happened around traced wands. But inside a magical home, the detected magic could be from an adult, so the Ministry ignored any magic detections if the marked wands were inside magic-heavy areas. Not that it mattered because Quinn hadn't touched his wand in a year, and the wand that he was holding while sitting in front of Astoria was the fake that he had crafted before his first year. "Are you ready, Astoria?" asked Quinn as he gazed at the condition of the girl in front of him. The curse was still a week away from resurfacing, but Quinn had decided that he would heal Astoria a week before the due date so she wouldn't ever feel the slightest of the effects. "Yes, I am ready," answered Astoria, sounding nervous. The last time, she hadn't known what Quinn was doing. It happened so abruptly and swiftly that she didn't have time to comprehend what was happening. But this time, she was aware of what Quinn was doing and, thus, it made her feel a little nervous in case something went wrong. "It will be all right. You just need to sit back and relax. I will take care of everything," assured Quinn with a smile as if trying to calm a child before they got an injection. "Concentrate on the pretty blue that will appear on your body and enjoy the process. It will be over before you even know it." Quinn put hands out just ahead of his lap, and Astoria placed her hands into Quinn's, though not before exhaling a deep sigh. For a few moments, Quinn did nothing but hold hands with Astoria, giving her time to adjust and get ready. After he thought she was ready, Quinn gently released his right from Astoria's left, held the fake wand in his hand, and did a bogus swing to get the wand out of the way. Red fiery glowing veins appeared on Quinn's forearms, covering his hands in a network of blood that was channeling blood magic. He gently grasped Astoria's hands and then looked at her to see that Astoria was still a little nervous. "Astoria, look at me," he called out, causing Astoria to look up from his hands to his face. "Look at my face if you are feeling nervous. Concentrate on my eyes and forget about the magic. It will feel relaxing in a minute." Astoria nodded and concentrated on Quinn's stone-grey eyes, which were smiling. She tried to ignore the magic in Quinn's arms. Jacob and Sophie Greengrass watched as the glowing red veins traveled up Astoria's arms and covered her entire body in a network of illuminated veins. They both felt anxious about the treatment that was happening in front of their eyes. They had had a healer who had been really experienced in curses check on Astoria when she returned home. And the healer confirmed that Astoria's blood curse had been repressed and that she wasn't in any immediate danger. But even then, they were nervous about the current treatment. The two parents had no idea what Quinn was doing and only knew that blood magic was dangerous. It caused them to be anxious. As such, they prayed that everything would go smoothly. George, Elliot, and Ms. Rosie also watched Quinn healing Astoria. Aside from George, who had seen Quinn briefly activate blood magic, for the others it was the first time they had seen blood magic performed. None in the room knew Quinn's full capabilities in the room, and his family was no exception. His family knew Quinn was advanced for his age, but none of them knew the specifics. Hence, it was their first time seeing Quinn perform blood magic. They all watched. Then, the flashing veins covering Astoria's body and Quinn's forearms turned a sparkling blue. It was at that moment that the knowledge from healing magic and water magic came into play, as Quinn started to repress the blood curse to sleep for a while. Daphne sat perpendicular, and she breathed a sigh of relief as the color changed to blue, as she saw Astoria immediately relax and loosen up. It was clear that Astoria was feeling better already. Her eyes then went to Quinn, who she saw was still smiling, though she could see his eyes were observing Astoria with concentration and focus. It was clear he wanted to make sure nothing went wrong. As she watched, Daphne got lost watching Quinn, who was different from what she usually saw. She was used to seeing Quinn joking around, laughing, making jokes, joining up with Tracy to act silly. But she hadn't seen Quinn acting seriously that much. The only time she could recall him being that serious was when he chased away the Dementors. Nonetheless, at that time, she had been scared of the Dementor and wasn't paying much attention. By the time she returned to normal, Quinn was grinning and talking about chocolate. So this was Daphne's first time seeing Quinn really focused on something, and because she was so close to him, she couldn't help but find herself lost at the sight that was in front of her. It took a few minutes to complete the process. After finishing, Quinn breathed a sigh to release the magic. The blue-colored veins retreated from Astoria's body and his forearms. Then, he cut the connection by releasing Astoria's hands. "How are you feeling?" asked Quinn. "It felt good while you were doing magic, but right now, I don't feel any different from before," answered Astoria. "Maybe a little skippy, but nothing else." "Excellent, that means it went fine," nodded Quinn and then turned to the Greengrass parents. "She'll be quite energetic and active today. It would be something like a child hopped up on sugar, so let her run around and tire herself out, or she won't sleep at night," said Quinn, giving follow-up remarks to the parents of his patients. "She will be fine for the rest of the summer break. I think we should do this once more before going to school. For the rest of the sessions, I will take care of this inside the school itself." Sophie Greengrass stepped forwards towards and took his hands in hers. "Thank you, Quinn. You've done a great favor to my family. I can't express how grateful we are to you." It took Quinn a moment before he was able to speak. "Oh, not a problem at all, Mrs. Greengrass. It was my pleasure to help Astoria out. Astoria is more fun when she's like this." Jacob Greengrass, too, thanked Quinn for his help and told him that if Quinn ever needed any help, he only needed to ask. Scene break. It was time for the Greengrass to return home. Everyone was standing in the fireplace room. "Mr. West. Thank you for your hospitality," smiled Jacob Greengrass as he shook hands with George. "It was a pleasure to meet you again, and I look forward to our cooperation in the future." As Quinn had suggested, George had proposed a business proposition and, as Quinn had thought, Jacob had been open to participating in a profitable venture with the West family. "Let's meet soon to talk, Jacob," nodded George. As the adults talked, Astoria approached Quinn and beckoned him to lean down. "What is it?" asked Quinn as he leaned down. He wondered why Astoria wanted to whisper something in his ear. But Astoria had other plans as she placed her hand on Quinn's shoulder and then placed a soft peck on his cheek. "Astoria!" exclaimed Daphne, who was standing nearby with her mother. She felt a little annoyed at Astoria's actions. "Oh my," smiled Sophie with a hand in front of her lips. She had watched with interest when her younger daughter kissed Quinn on his cheek. The younger Greengrass then shyly giggled and ran towards the fireplace, threw the flu powder into the fireplace, and then jumped inside after speaking of her destination. Quinn couldn't help but be stunned. His hand went to his cheek. He suddenly became conscious of the eyes of others in the room and felt a little shy as everyone stared at him. Unfortunately for him, unlike Astoria, he couldn't disappear into the flue fireplace. He could only stand still as the adults chuckled while a blonde girl glared at him from the corner of his eyes. This marks the end of part 44 of the story, Magical Journey in Harry Potter World. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.